Hey everyone, Adam here, working today on assembling a DistoX2. This project is to modify a Leica e7400x, that's the American model of the X310, and we're going to add a DistoX2 board kit with a compass and accelerometer on here in order to be able to do cave surveying. This kit comes with the DistoX2 board, it comes with a USB charger. I've purchased a battery separately, which is required and noted on their site. It also comes with some non-magnetic screws and some bumper pads that need to be assembled. Some of the other things you're going to need in order to assemble this is you're going to need a soldering iron in order to solder 3 different joints. You're going to need some solder, and you're going to need a T6 Torx wrench or screwdriver in order to open up the DistoX. So once you have those tools, make sure you order them in advance because not everyone has them. The T6 is a very small star. Go ahead and get those ready and we're ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do, other than what everyone else has done, is I'm going to start my soldering iron. I want my soldering iron to be nice and hot. The hotter your soldering iron is, the better this is going to be able to be soldered. So while I wait for my soldering iron to heat up, I'm actually going to go ahead and get ready to disassemble my Disto first. A lot of people call for you to first do your board, but I'm waiting for my soldering iron to heat up, so that's what I'm going to do here. Now, as I'm taking this board apart, there is a small little ribbon cable here which is attached. In order to get the board to come apart, we're going to need to disconnect the ribbon cable. And there is a second ribbon cable in here which is also attached, and we're going to need to disconnect that. We can go ahead and set this aside now. Now I'm going to, still using the T6 wrench or screwdriver, to take the board off. Assembling these ribbon cables nice and easy. Now there are 2 solder joints in here, one right here and one right here, that need to be removed in order to take these boards completely out. Those are the battery contact leads. So let's see if this soldering iron is heated up now well enough. I'm going to be using some solder wick, which I have on hand. You can also use a solder sucker in order to do this. Now this solder wick that I'm using here comes pre-rosined. It has a little bit of rosin in here, which helps us to get this started. Next step, I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to start working on the DistoX board. Now, on the back of the DistoX board, we have 2 leads. We have a positive lead and a negative lead. Now, we're going to need to make very carefully sure that the leads on the battery, the positive lead and the negative lead, match up with those 2 leads. I'm going to straighten out this copper here just a little bit. Came in crooked when I got it. I'm going to go ahead and start by tinning the lead with some solder. Now I'm going to flip this over and do the back sides just to make it easier on me. I'm tinning these so they'll solder nice and easy when I put them together. And now they're ready to put together. Positive on the positive side, negative on the negative side. Make sure they're nice and lined up before I do this. Kind of go ahead. Now you want to make sure that you put these on toward the end of the board so that you can wrap them over the board later. This is going to be wrapped over the top of the board. And it is better not to apply too much heat to this. This is a lithium battery. We don't want to apply too much heat here for prolonged periods of time. You're going to need to heat it up nice and warm so that it'll melt and solder together. But we're not going to leave it on there all day. I'm having an issue here with it popping back up. So I'm going to grab some tweezers here to help me so I can keep holding it down. There we go, and done. And there we go. Now, one of the other things a lot of people do is in here, there are some points here where this little swivel connects to, and they remove these so they can remove this swivel. I'm going to leave the swivel in. You just have to make sure you take the magnet out of the swivel part later. But we're going to go ahead and skip that step here in the instructions. Now, we're going to go ahead and get ready to start reconnecting this board. I'm going to put some of these on here, some of these bumpers on here, on the battery. This will be used later on. We're going to do these in the same direction as the text on this side of the battery. Flip this over, and I'm going to put them in the opposite direction, the perpendicular direction here. Good. Now, we're ready to go ahead and put this board back in. Now, as we're going, we're going to need to reattach the ribbon cables. It's a little bit harder putting them back in. You have to have a good eye. So, learning from my mistakes here on this one, there is a slider you can pull out, which makes this real easy to assemble. So on these guys, you pull the slider out, this little brown slider on the piece right here. You pull that out, you push the cable in, and then you push it in. Learning from my mistakes here. Okay. I'm also going to go ahead and reattach this board where it belongs. And I accidentally turned the darn thing on. Now I've got this battery out of my way, and I'm going to resolder these battery connections. Now while you're doing that, be careful not to unsolder any of the other connections that you're working on. There we go, one solder. And two solder. We're going to use the same screw here, replace it. Now for this T6 screwdriver, I'm assuming that at this point you already have one, but if you don't have one and you're just watching the video, the best place I found locally to get one was Harbor Freight Tools. They were cheap, easy to get hold of locally. The next part is going to be a little more interesting. We have to remove one of the screws here. We are going to remove the screw, which is on this piece of the component, and it is on, if you have the white part up, it's going to be on your right hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and move that here, tighten down my chuck. Take out my replacement brass screw. Now my replacement brass screw uses a flathead. So you're going to need one of those. Be very careful when you screw this in though, because it is not necessarily threaded exactly the same as the other one, so you do not want to over torque this. You're going to tighten it down just until it's snug. And in fact, in my case, it's not even going to get snug. We're just going to leave it there. So long as it stays in, we are good. Now we're ready to reinsert the other cables to this part of the unit. This is going to be a little more difficult because the whole unit is assembled. We're going to pull the slider out, this little black slider on this one, in order to pull it out. We are going to reinsert the cable here. Sorry, I'm blocking your view. And then we're going to close that slider again in order to lock this in place. And that's our display connected. Double checking my work here. There we go. Black part is in. And finally, we've got all ribbons except for the keypad ribbon connected. And this ribbon does not require pulling out the slider. There we go. Now I've got the cables hooked up. The battery is inside the case here. I'm going to be very careful not to squish these cables too much as I push this in. I want to be very sure when you do this that the cables do not get caught in the side of the case. They will cause the case to leak. Now we're going to take our screws, being careful to make sure that your little O-ring gasket is in the right hole. And you haven't lost any of those. And we're going to reconnect these. Now when I connect these, I like to connect diagonally so we start holding the case together. I don't tighten them all the way down until I've got them all inserted. Double checking again to make sure no cables are in the way or any other parts. Looks good. You're going to want to tighten these nice and snug so that you get a good waterproof fit, but not overdoing it. You don't want to strip the screws. Now we check the outside of the case, make sure that we have no gaps along the outside. Nice. And at this point, we can go ahead and see whether the unit turns on. And it does. Excellent. Now this isn't calibrated, but it does turn on and off. So we've got good news there. Now the next step I'm going to do before I put the charger in is I'm going to remove the magnet from this unit. Now the magnet, when you're looking at the base, is located right here. This takes a little bit of doing to get into without having removed the item, but we're going to go ahead and try and get that out of here. So in order to remove the magnet here, what I've basically done is taken a razor blade and cut away this portion in a little hemisphere. You'll notice I did this after I had already checked to make sure that the unit was still working in case of a warranty issue. But now that I've cut that half away, I can simply pull this little magnet out. Nice and easy. Okay, moving on to the last component here now. We're going to add the USB charger to this device. In order to do that, we are going to start by clearing out some space here. We don't need these extra contacts on the upper side of the unit. And we can just go ahead and pull them out. They're snug but removable. these out of here, out of our way. And on this side of the unit, we're going to need to pull these out a little bit so that we can fit our USB board under there. We'll just bend these out a little bit so our USB board fits. And our USB board is actually going in upside down here. Making sure it fits here. And there it is. Maybe just a little bit more. And I want to double check our contacts here on the front side here. We're going to connect the ground to the positive terminal. No, we're connecting the ground to the negative terminal right here, and we're connecting the VCC to the positive terminal. And as you can see, ground is on on the outside and VCC is on the other. So we're going to just double check that, as we always should before we solder. Get those in there nice and well. Check our solder connections. Nice and good. And we should be able to tilt this board up just a little bit here. There we go. Now we have a completed DistoX. Turn it on. And that's it. Okay, looking through my parts here, I noticed a screw missing, which isn't a problem. We've double checked our parts and we noticed that, hey, we have made a mistake. So we're going to go back in here and remove this screw right here, which is next to the sensor. What you'll notice is this flap here, as you're looking at it, if this is on the bottom in its upper right hand corner, this center screw right here is the screw that we need to replace. So I'm going to remove that. We're going to be extra careful not to over torque this screw. Once again, it is not a perfect fit necessarily. So we need to drive it in so that it's snug and waterproof, but not so that it strips. There we go. And now we're fixed.